This is Chris Daly and Ron Sadoff from Primary Intelligence, and we're beginning our webinar now, The 3 Benefits of Win-Loss You Can't Ignore. Just by way of introduction, I'm Chris Daly. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Primary Intelligence. We're a company that conducts sales intelligence exercise, primarily win-loss, competitive intelligence, account defection type research, and we believe that salespeople can and should sell more with intelligence. Ron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ron Sadoff, and I'm the director of our senior analyst team here at Primary Intelligence. And that means that I do a lot of data analysis and looking at the results that we get from our competitive intelligence initiatives.
Okay, it's really a great thing to have Ron on the phone with us today. He's got a lot of insight into the type of intelligence we generate and some of the results that we're able to accomplish with that. We hope to be able to share some very good information with you today. Hopefully, this will be time very well spent, and you'll be able to take back information that will help to make you more effective or your company more effective. As we get rolling, I want to just point out the fact that on your GoToWebinar interface, you're able to enter questions for us. This is your chance to be part of the webinar and shape our content. As we go along, we'd like this to be as relevant as possible, and you can play a big part in making that happen. So again, if you've got questions, we'll try to answer those in real time. If not, we will hold them to the end. We'll look forward to answering as many of those as we can. Just quickly, and I know we just got through with a poll, but I'd like to ask you a question. In your company, which department is best positioned to make effective use of win-loss data? That poll is now on your screen. I'd like you to take a second to let us know who in your company is best positioned to make effective use of win-loss data. If you're doing the program, this could be based on your current experience of who's getting the best benefit and making best use. If you don't have a program in place or it's not as mature as you'd like it to be, who do you suppose would be that department that would make the best use of the data? And I appreciate everybody weighing in with that. We have a very good group of attendees today. I think we have the opportunity to share. I'm looking forward to presenting these 3 benefits that you can't ignore. And, it kind of goes without saying that the purpose of win-loss, most people at least figure, is to help salespeople sell more, right? I mean, if you're going to be looking at wins and losses, you're looking at this idea of how can we sell more effectively. But some of the benefits we talk about today may actually have broader applicability than just the sales department. We'll go ahead and close that poll in about 5 seconds. And let's show those results. Looks like, according to our audience today, 63% say that sales and sales operations are best poised. Intelligence professionals, 13%. Marketing, 17%. I'm curious about the 4% of executives. I wonder if that, Ron, is because executives don't use this type of intelligence, or it's not what they're looking for to make decisions. Tie this to the fact that our earlier poll question said, that decision makers that know how to use intelligence would be the biggest secret to effective competitive intelligence use. What do you make of the fact that so few of them are saying their executives are poised to use this kind of information?
Well, I'm just wondering if it might be the case where it's not the data that they're positioned to use, but rather the recommendations and findings that come out of that data.
Okay, interesting. I think that's very valid. Well, let's go ahead and we will move forward in our presentation. And Ron, before we talk about the benefits of intelligence, would you be willing to talk a little bit about some of the best practices for a win-loss program, just so we can kind of have a basic foundation to talk from?
Sure. In order to actually gain any benefits from a win-loss program, you need to make sure that your win-loss program is at least marginally functional enough to be able to get you the kind of information you need.
Okay.
And so really, you don't have to become completely ensconced in all the nuances of creating a statistical model to do it correctly. There are just some basic factors that I think are really kind of important foundations you need to think about. And one of the first of these is just that your win-loss initiative, your win-loss program should not be an off-the-cuff kind of endeavor. Rather, it should be something that is very focused, especially in early initial win-loss initiatives. So you should really focus on the research and the questions that you really want to have answered.
Okay.
So if you want to start small, about, okay, why are we losing to a particular competitor? What are they thinking about a particular aspect of our product or our sales process? Starting small and focusing is probably better than trying to get every answer in the world, getting too much data that's really generic that's not going to help you.
Okay.
You also want to make sure that your interviewers, whether it's yourself, whether it's the people you hire to do your interviews, whether it's a team that you're working with, that they're really trying to get the backstory behind the decision rather than just survey dots on a piece of paper.
Okay.
So what you're really trying to do is you're trying to elicit responses that will answer the questions that you've come up with in that prior exercise you did where you're trying to focus.
It's really true that each sales opportunity is really kind of its own story. As much as you'd like to think you have a process, as much as you'd like to take people through your sales funnel in an organized manner, that's not necessarily the way clients evaluate and buy. And as you say, this elicit responses idea, as opposed to just checking off data, I think that's extremely important.
Right. It's not just a matter of getting a sufficient sample size to answer the numbers question. You want to try to get what's going on behind the scenes, and which means talking to your clients, not just surveying them.
Okay.
You also want to make sure that the information you receive, this is kind of in the formulation of your questions from the very beginning, is going to be actionable and not just interesting. In other words, you want to make sure that this is something that if you get this answer, you know what are some things I can do with this information once I get these answers. So you could have a win-loss program where you ask questions about what was the warehouse size of the competitor you were going up against. But you have to ask yourself, if I get that information, what would I do with it? And if your answer is show it to somebody, or if your answer is archive it, or if your answer is put it on a piece of paper, and that's it, then that may be a question you want to rethink or remove from your survey.
Okay.
You should have an idea of saying, if I find out what features, for example, my customers like, I can what my action will be is I will come up with a new feature set to give to my research and development team.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that you have an idea of when I get these answers, what will that lead to?
Okay. Go ahead.
And the final aspect of best practices for your win-loss program, in a very general sense, is, and this really fits into that actionable aspect of your information, is get input from the key stakeholders, the people you know that will be using this information, the people that you know will be using it, looking at it, getting recommendations, and find out what their interests are, and what kind of answers they're looking for, what kind of responses they would like to see. And that'll make your job, I would think, 1,000 times easier.
As we go along, a question that was submitted to us ahead of time during the registration process, a gentleman asked the question, how do you gather loss data, given that it's very difficult to get from folks who don't want that information known for either personal or professional reasons? Let's talk about that for a minute, because I think that anybody who conducts a win-loss program would agree that wins are easy. Everybody will talk about the wins, but sometimes it's hard to get to those losses within the company and find out who you ought to be contacting.
Yeah, this is a question that actually comes up in most of our seminars, in our webinars, is the question about dealing with the lost opportunities. And I think that initially when people think about win-loss, they think, well, the lost opportunities are going to be almost impossible to get because they don't want to deal with us anymore. We won't be able to get it from our salespeople. It'll just be this kind of holy grail that we'll never actually ever see. But if you just actually open your perceptions to the fact that people like to explain why they do things, and most people are actually fairly generous with information, as long as you're upfront with them about what you're doing with it, then it's surprising how much information you can get from lost opportunities, and sometimes even turn them into no longer being lost opportunities.
Sure. Okay.
So really, it's just it really depends upon the particular client, the particular company you're working for, but it really breaks down into two aspects that you have to do: winning the hearts of your sales team and winning the hearts of your lost respondents. And both of these are really dependent upon showing the value of what you're doing and also being very upfront about why you're doing it. So for instance, with the sales team, you want to make sure that the sales team knows that when you're doing a win-loss opportunity and you're talking to one of their lost opportunities, that it is just that, an opportunity. It's an opportunity for them to find out where they can improve. It's an opportunity for them to find out what really happened in that sale. And it's an opportunity, in a lot of cases, to have a much stronger chance of coming back and winning back that business, as we'll be talking about in a few minutes.
Okay.
And you have to be honest about who you're going to be talking to, letting them know what kind of questions will be asked, and letting the sales team know that this is not going to be used, hopefully, as a tool for yelling at them or a tool for monitoring their progress or grading them, but rather a tool that will help them sell more in the future.
Okay.
When you talk to the lost respondents, you need to have the same kind of honesty, being upfront and showing the value. Lost prospects, even though you've already lost that business in many cases, you can say, in future, your input will be very helpful to us to improve our services so that we can better serve your needs in the future. Mm-hmm. Letting them know that, not going in there saying, we're doing a generic study, and, saying that you're somebody you're not, but just saying, hey, we dealt with you in the past. We'd like to know what happened so that we can serve you better in the future. Mm-hmm. That kind of honest approach gives you surprisingly good results for them saying, well, sure, I'd love to talk to you about, what you could do better.
I think that's great. And it's really borne out over time here at Primary Intelligence, the fact that when we do exactly what you've talked about, at least with the respondents, this is what we're trying to do, this is what's in it for you, this is what the company hopes to learn and improve, we tend to get very good feedback. Some people will ask us, doesn't that bias the information to know who it's coming from? And that's a good question, but if you can't get anybody to talk to you, then it doesn't really matter.
If by bias, you mean that if they know it's coming from company Y, so they talk a lot about company Y?
Right.
Yeah, there's a bias there, but it's a bias you want because that's what you're interested in.
True. Very good. There are a couple of benefits we might point out. Don't want to be accused of singing our song too loudly, but as you think about win-loss, or if you prepare to do this, the third-party factor I think is very important also. Most of our clients, of course, it's a little bit of a stacked sample there, but those that work with us are very grateful for the benefits that they receive in having a third party. We've experienced increased respondent participation being a third party. People tend to want to talk to us a little bit more willingly than they do the company that they interacted with on the sale. I don't know if there's a feeling of hesitation or embarrassment or they don't want to be candid to the people that they worked with. But as a third party, we tend to do very well on our participation rates.
And it's important to realize that when we talk about that, we're not saying that we're going in disguising who our client is, but rather in most cases, I would say probably 90% of the cases, the client is mentioned as being who it is that is sponsoring the research. So it's not a case of they're more candid because they don't think the results are going to be going to that particular client. Mm-hmm. Rather, it's more of a case of they don't want to be, in some cases, don't want to be mean to the client to their face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A win-loss program conducted by a third party will probably get you more consistent information or at least more consistent production. And that kind of goes a little toward the bottom idea also of being more resource efficient. Boy, I'm so stacked up in my job, it's hard to, if I didn't have resources that I could ask to do this kind of work for our company, it would be hard to imagine it getting done. Unless you have somebody in your company dedicated to getting this done, and it does take a lot of work to do a good win-loss analysis. Boy, you'd end up with a large backlog of opportunities and possibly not enough hands to get the work done. So as we move in to our topic, we're excited to talk about the fact of being able to produce valuable competitive intelligence, be able to have analytics to show potential ROI and wrapping those analytics around the win-loss data that's provided, and also the ability to win back business. And what we're going to do from this point in the webinar is we're going to talk about some of the things that we have seen and helped companies do with win-loss, and we want to be able to tell you a little story or give some examples of results that have happened in each of these areas. And hopefully as you go through this, you'll be able to see opportunities for your company to employ these same techniques and receive these types of benefits also. And I'm certainly not saying we're going to limit the benefits of win-loss to these three things. There are dozens of potential areas of business improvement. But these are three that stick out and have really created some interesting stories for us lately, and so we want to discuss those a little. Before we move forward any further, as we're talking about these three topics, I'm going to open a poll quickly one last time, and tell me, in your business, which of these benefits that we're going to discuss today would probably mean the most? We'll leave that open for just a minute and let people answer the question. We appreciate people being willing to share this type of information with us. And again, on that idea of the losses with the sales reps, I've seen some companies where the sales reps just seem very inaccessible, or they're not able to get losses. Part of that fight can be a sales job on the sales team, trying to help them understand that opportunity to improve, to find out what really happened. Was it really price? It almost never is. Value is such a broad thing. Trying to help sales reps understand what it was that caused them to seek value from one competitor to the next, and how can I counter that next time. There's some very, very compelling ideas that you can share with the sales reps and sales management to elicit their response.
And one of the things you can do there as well is, to use an old term, is to try to succeed with success, which is once you've gotten one or two good loss kind of interviews that you've done in your win-loss program, go ahead and share those with your sales team so they know exactly what it is that you're producing, so they know exactly what kind of information you're eliciting there. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of cases they'll say, oh yeah, that's really good stuff, in which case the losses will flow a little bit more freely. Mm-hmm. So take your first initial successes, your first initial information, and share that as soon as possible so that hopefully you'll get more repeat business basically from your salespeople.
Good point. I like that idea. Going to close that poll. Turns out that, just so we have an idea today, the majority are looking for increased chances, or would think their benefits that would mean the most would be increased chances of winning back business. That's why we put it where it is. I think you're going to find the ideas we expressed there today extremely powerful. But in any case, let's move forward into this. Talking about valuable competitive intelligence. We are at a place where, wouldn't it be great to be able to track competitive movements in real time? Wouldn't it be great to be able to know what's happening inside of your competitor? How in the world can you have eyeballs on the ground in your competitors' businesses? Most of the time, that's not considered particularly, ethical or legal for that matter. And we're certainly not in favor of anybody being arrested over competitive intelligence. That doesn't sound fun at all. But one of the things that we can talk about are the fact that your clients and your prospects know a lot about what's happening inside of your competitors, and you'd be surprised at how much information you can get from them in a completely ethical manner. So let's talk about prioritizing CI. The idea is, how practical is it to obtain the information you're looking for? And I know there are always those nuggets people are asking for that are stuffed way deep inside of your competitor. Things that you'll probably never get at, but they're requests anyway. There are those pieces of information that are in the public domain, and then there's a large, variant in between. And then you have to also ask yourself, competitive intelligence. Can I create ROI with the intelligence that I'm gathering? Ron was mentioning earlier, this idea of trying to find out how many warehouse feet space, square somethings or another are in Des Moines or whatever the case may be. And the idea is, in some places that may be relevant. But sometimes we have to try to tone down all of the requests that we have for competitive intelligence and make sure that there is a potential to make business change off of those. Is it actionable? And so the idea is, of course, to create a way of determining that. We've got the quadrant on the screen, the idea of making sure that it's highly practical to obtain and that it is a high ROI potential. Being able to come up with a rating system for those two axes allows you to be able to plot where each competitive intelligence initiative should be. And of course, stay away from the bottom left, head toward the top right as often as possible. Tantalizing is fun, and it's neat to have interesting facts, but if you can't do anything with it, what's the point? And the same idea with busy work. That's not where I want to be. great way to spend a day and draw a paycheck, I guess, but I'd really rather think that the information I'm gathering goes towards helping my company make changes that will make it stronger, more competitive, better positioned. The idea about getting information that's going to satisfy these ideas is really pretty simple. And I think that we all agree that competitive intelligence and a voice of the customer program should go hand in hand. As you're talking to your current clients or you're talking to prospects, there are many different questions that you can ask about the competition as well as yourself, so you can get comparison scores. But, in a good voice of the customer program, you have to at least believe that these types of programs are going to yield the best information. And, of course, the customer's voice can be heard loud and clear down on the bottom section of the purchase decision with win-loss analysis. I think that most companies, surprise, surprise for primary intelligence, but most companies can yield benefits far greater than they can imagine from a win-loss program, or they can at least yield benefits that are at least as great as a client satisfaction or an account loyalty program.
One thing, talking about that,
go ahead.
It's just that by including win-loss into a larger competitive intelligence initiative, you're adding a snapshot to the information you're gathering. So you're moving away from simply, one of the problems I see sometimes in competitive intelligence is that it's basically just that, a snapshot where someone is saying, here's where what our competitors are doing in this one moment of time. Mm-hmm. With an ongoing competitive intelligence program, you get a better sense of where are our competitors heading, how are we faring against them, are we falling back, are we moving forward? And by having a full competitive intelligence program, you can take various snapshots and put them together just like you would take various frames and make it into a film. Mm-hmm. These various snapshots come together to give you a better sense of what the process is and where trends are going in terms of how you're competing against your other vendors. Mm.
Let's talk a little bit about the kind of intelligence that, just even at a basic level, whether or not you contract with a third party, what kind of intelligence can you gather and how can you make use of that information? The first question, where are you winning and where are you losing? This is some very interesting information that's going to help answer a lot of questions for sales, possibly prioritize marketing initiatives, and give executive groups the strategy that they need to understand how to better plan the resources and fight the battle. Ron, talk to me a little bit about this.
Well, some of the things that you can find out from doing just a basic survey of who it is you're going up against and who's winning and who's losing, and this is really the most basic of win-loss analysis. Even from this, you can understand who it is you're going up against the most, mm-hmm. who are your clients most likely to call if they're looking for this kind of solution, so which ones are at the top of mind, and which ones are having the best success against you or against other competitors.
Okay.
So, for instance, here, in this list, you can see that for this particular company, IBM is seen the most often, but they don't have a particularly high conversion rate. So it could be that IBM is one that you might say, well, we're always going up against them, so we have to really focus on beating them. Mm-hmm. But if their conversion rate is lower than, say, someone who, whenever they come in contact with your company, beats the pants off you, you may want to say, well, let's focus our questions more on the one that is going to be the tough competitor as opposed to the one that we just see a lot.
Okay.
So that'll give you some basic information there.
Great. So this idea of where are you winning and losing, easily answered in this type of research. Okay, the next idea of competitive and performance metrics right here, Ron.
Okay, what this basically lists is if you went and asked your respondents, prospects and customers, how they rated you and your competitors in various aspects of your company, whether it's company aspects like your financial strength or the size of your company or your customer service, or if it's about product. Mm-hmm. I think the ones we have here listed are mainly involving the solution or the product criteria, or even criteria about your sales team. How responsive were they? How professional were they? Mm-hmm. If you get those kinds of performance metrics, those kind of ratings, then you can start being a lot more granular in terms of, in what areas are we succeeding against the competition or doing better than them? In what areas are we not doing better than them?
Okay.
So, for instance, in this particular example, if you look at this, you can see that for, let's take for instance, let's say we're interested in finding out about how we did against Fuji. We could see that there are some areas where we did very well. For example, functionality, implementation time, scalability, solution flexibility. And you can say, okay, there are some areas where if we go up against this competitor again, we have an advantage here, so these may be some things that we want to stress when we're talking to that prospect.
And just in ease of reading this, those boxes that are green are areas where we have a competitive strength, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And the areas that are in the light yellow are areas where the competitor had a significant advantage over the client company. So if you looked here, you could see that, maybe for instance you said purchase cost across the board, we have a disadvantage against our competition. But overall cost, we're pretty much close to everybody. And in fact, we have an advantage over IBM. So that tells us that if we go in and start talking about cost or price, we probably don't want to focus on what the list price is, but whenever we talk about it, we want to talk about ROI or total cost of ownership, because that's where our strength is.
Well, it kind of almost tells you where the field levels out. I mean, in that particular instance you're giving, it may be that your competition is coming in with equipment that they may think is, they're pricing lower, but the service fees and the maintenance and such, in the end, evens that field out. It's something very important to let your sales team know. Like you say, boy, if you can come in advance with that information and take that concern off the table before it becomes one, that's very powerful.
And one of the things you also should think about when you're looking at charts like this is that this is basically not only information that's an end goal that you're trying to get that can help you make decisions, but it'll also help you make further decisions about future CI initiatives.
Okay.
So, for instance, if you're trying to find out why did we do so poorly, for example, for ability to customize. We did really poorly against IKON in ability to customize. Maybe we should ask some specific questions in our next round of interviewing that'll give us some ideas about, well, what kind of customization are our clients, our prospects wanting to get? And how do they know about our customization abilities? Maybe it's a case where they just don't know that you can do this kind of customization.
Well, that'd be a nice little bit of ROI, is knowing you didn't have to fix anything, you just have to say a few different things.
Right. So it's also a tool for drilling down further when you move into the next steps of your CI.
Oh, great. A question that's just been asked, and again, I appreciate the interactivity of our audience today. The question is asked, do you work with win-loss prospects to define the criterion, or is this provided by the company? There's value in defining what the prospect feels are the relevant criterion. And that's a good question. And we recommend when we go in having a list of criteria that's used, because when you leave it completely to the prospect, it's hard for them necessarily to identify all the facets of the sales process in which you're interested. We also tend to know that in either a basic, a complex, or those middle B2B decisions, there tend to be a lot of very specific steps that customers go through when they evaluate. So we want to make sure that we're trying to help them give performance ratings in all of those areas, as opposed to maybe the 2 or 3 that might be top of mind with the one person that you're talking to at that moment. So I think that's a great question. As we wrap up this idea of the better CI, the idea is that we're going to take the information to pinpoint performance advantages, either our competition's performance advantages or ours. We can take that information and leverage it to make intelligence-based decisions. We can also understand how to maneuver against specific competitors. And to illustrate this point, one of our healthcare clients is using our intelligence today, and they've talked about the way that they have sold improvement projects to their sales management and to their executive team, because they have had the clear visibility to say, look, this is a problem. We've figured out what our specific problem is. For example, an ability to customize. It doesn't have anything to do with the product. We've found out from follow-up interviews that we're not able to show that effectively. Our marketing information is not communicating that effectively. And whether or not it's true, our prospects believe that competitor X is doing a better job than we are. Let's spend this money on these initiatives to fix those specific problems so we can increase that rating and be more competitive right now. It's a great ability to be able to justify and validate the money that could be spent on processes to improve. The second idea we're going to talk about is analytics to win more business. And this is a topic that's really very near and dear to our heart at Primary Intelligence. It's a part of the foundation that we've built our company on, is the ability to show not only the tactical changes you can make with the competitive intelligence we've described, but how do you take this to the strategic level? How do you get a higher degree of statistical information into your data? How can you gain insight that might not be there? Moving away from that idea of stated importance into derived importance, understanding behaviors rather than just words. And Thomas Davenport, in a book, Competing on Analytics, he talks about companies are going to have to use analytics in order to be more effective. The playing field is leveling out so much globally that sometimes understanding those hidden opportunities and learning how to refine your processes just a little bit more is going to be that edge that allows you to be more competitive. Well, at Primary Intelligence, I'll tell you a little bit about how we do things, and you can try to relate this to what you do, and perhaps you just use it as a roadmap yourself. But the idea is we use a 3-step model in order to apply analytics. The first thing we do is interview the wins and losses, or we could do the same thing with account retention. But the idea is we're going to go out and gather that information just like you would within your own company. Measure your company's performance in your product performance, sales performance, company performance, and measure that against the competition, just exactly as Ron described in the previous section. Now, we use a predictive model that we've developed to answer the question of what. In other words, what do we improve to achieve maximum benefit? We have a lot of different, up to 30 different performance areas we're going to measure. If we pull, lever A, what will the result be, and will it be better than if we pull lever B, C, or D? And then after we have gone and used our analytics to determine that what should we improve, now we want to come back with the actionable part of how do we make those improvements most efficiently. And let's go ahead through a little exercise of how you would actually implement this. And, first of all, I'll put up a table of data, and I'll explain what we're looking at. This table of data is more or less the same thing that Ron was showing just a minute ago, but the idea is now we've got all of our competitors' data rolled up into one. You don't have to, but for the purpose of what we're doing right now, it'll be most convenient. As you look at this, you would see that the overall solution cost influencer, all of your wins and losses together rated you as an 8.1 on a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 is poor, 10 is excellent. Now, 8.1 feels pretty good, but unless you have something to compare that against, you don't really know if it's good or bad. And it turns out that you have a negative 1 point gap score here. In other words, the combined competition was rated collectively at a 9.1. And then in the right column, you can see if we believe this pertains more to company, sales team, or the product, for a little bit of clarification. Understanding needs, the second one down, an 8.5. That's a really good score, but it's still 0.7 behind the combined competition. Number 3, complete solution set, 8.5, and so on. You can see that these are listed from top to bottom, from biggest negative gap, or in other words, big weakness, down to the bottom, your size, company size, and your ability to do demonstrations. You have positive gaps there. Those are your positive performance areas or your areas of competitive strength. Now that's great, and you can address some of those ideas right now in real time, but then again you might want to ask yourself the question, if I were to increase my performance in each of these areas, overall solution cost at the top, take that from an 8.1 to a 9.1, their perception of my company size or my ability to do demonstrations, take those from a 7.6 to an 8.6. Where will I get the biggest bang for the buck? Where will I get the biggest improvement in my win rate? And that's a fantastic question to ask, and hopefully one that we can answer. Well, it turns out that we can. The idea here is illustrated in this table that I've put up on the screen. We now have added a new column called the impact column. And this impact column, in fact, Ron, would you help us out with what does the impact column tell us?
Well, what the impact column tells us is, based upon some statistical and predictive analysis, what the impact of this particular influencer or factor in the decision had on whether or not you won or lost the deal.
Okay.
Now, to go back to talk about gap scores, there could be some areas, just to give a silly example, maybe appearance, okay, might be an influencer. And let's say your company has impeccable appearance,
okay,
as opposed to the competitor. So you have a 2-point gap, gap there where it's positive. That's fine, and that's a strength, but it may have absolutely no impact on the final decision.
Okay.
If you reverse that and your appearance is 2 points less, you may say, oh, well, we need to, just based on that information, you may say to yourself, oh, well, then we need to improve that because that's the place where we're the weakest.
Okay.
Well, it may be the place where you have the greatest gap, but that doesn't mean that that's the one that you want to focus on to improve whether or not you sell.
Okay.
So what the impact score does is takes the gap scores plus some linear regression and other tools to look at how it applies to whether or not you won or lost the deal to come up with what we call our impact score, which then says this is the impact that this influencer had upon the win rate.
Okay.
And the higher that number is, the more confident you can be that improving it will improve your chances of winning future deals.
Okay. Which is insight that is not generally available to most companies. In fact, the idea of, hey, that's a strength, that's a weakness. So what? Just like you say, does it mean that if it's weak, if we fix it, it will make us better? Does it mean that if it's a competitive strength that we can either leave it alone or shouldn't tinker with it or out-emphasize it? It's hard to know without doing some sort of advanced statistical analysis to know. Mm-hmm. In this particular example, what you might find is that those areas that were weakest, number one, overall solution cost on the last table, you look about halfway down the screen, and you'll find that has a very small impact score. In other words, just because it was your biggest weakness doesn't mean it's the area where you ought to focus your resources. The second one down, the understanding needs, down towards 3/4 of the way down, has a 0 impact score. Now, what we're trying to say here is that if you were to improve that score from an 8.5 to a 9.5, what impact would that have on your win rate? And the idea is we would estimate that it would probably have very little to no impact on your win rate.
There would be no significant improvement.
Mm-hmm. However, those areas up at the top of the chart, the product knowledge, the industry experience, the complete solution set, those have very large impact scores. And we're saying, for example, on product knowledge, if you were to take your rating from a 7.7 to an 8.7, you would expect to have a large increase in win rate. Okay. In fact, if all things were perfect and the science can be applied, you would be saying that if you were to improve that 7.7 to an 8.7, you'd expect your win rate to increase by 5.7%. Okay. Industry experience, same thing. Take that 8.2 to a 9.2 and expect your win rate to increase by 4.8, almost 5%, which is a very powerful finding. Being able to prioritize those things of high impact versus those things of low impact give you the ability to strategically plan in your company to make improvement in the most important areas. Now, according to our 3-step process, we're at step number 2. We've answered the what. What should we improve that will have the biggest impact? Well, the third part about that is the how. How can we make the improvements that will have the biggest impact? And the idea is now we're going to look again at those gap scores that we had, and let's take a look at those gap scores in the areas of highest impact. Product knowledge. Against competitor 1, let's segment them out. Against competitor 1, we have a 1-point gap in the positive. We're very strong against competitor 1. That's good to know, but we want to know how to make best improvements. Let's look across to competitor 4 in red. A negative 1-point gap, even a little bit bigger than that. Well, let's define that competitor as having best practices in product knowledge. What are their sales reps doing to express product knowledge so fluently? Now, let's conduct a follow-up interview with those same people we just talked to Let's ask them specifically, what is it that allowed them or caused them to give our competitor a 9 when they only gave us a 7? What is competitor 4 doing that emphasizes product knowledge so well that we could also replicate to be able to get that kind of score? It's really a very simple set of questions, and it's information that is not proprietary, but it will allow you to understand the best practices of your competition in those areas of highest significance and impact so that you can make improvements, the best improvements where it matters most. And I'll tell you a little story about that. We have a software client that's based in the Northeast. They are big in time and labor software, but they just moved into human resource management. And they contracted with the Primary Intelligence to conduct a win-loss study that would allow them to see with the predictive analytics what it was that would give them the biggest bang for the buck, if you will. Well, after completing our interviews with them, split between wins and losses, we generated our impact scores and came up with 3 of the top 5 being their ability to do presentations, their features and functionality of their software, and their understanding of business needs that their sales reps were able to display. And all of these were high impact, and even a couple of them were competitive strengths over the competition. Well, they asked us, what should we do now? How do we make improvements in these areas? We followed this same methodology and went back to these prospects and clients that we had interviewed and asked about those that had done better presentations, or at least felt like the competition's presentations were better than our client, whose features and functionalities were superior to our clients, and whose sales reps tended to understand business needs. And our client was getting ready to do a lot of training with their sales reps at their global sales meeting based on these data. They were also calling in meetings with their programmers saying, hey, this is Rev 1, maybe we need to add a lot of features and functions. Maybe we missed the boat and didn't put in some very important features. Let's get this data back from Primary Intelligence, see what we need to do. Well, the fun part about all this was that everything hinged on understanding business needs. When it turned out that the sales reps did a good job of understanding business needs, their presentations were much more tailored and they received high ratings. It was very easy to see that those prospects that said no, they didn't really come in and understand our needs, were the ones that said presentations were also subpar. And when it came to features and functionality, we gave this client a list of the features that the prospects said were missing, and they smiled. They said, all of this is in our software already. How come the prospects don't know? Well, it turned out the sales reps didn't know how to present it right. They didn't know how to show the features and functionality. Instead of requiring a redesign and new features added to the software, it turned out to be as simple as creating a listening charting to needs map. In other words, when the client says they're looking to do this, show them these features. When the client says they have to have this in their software, show them the functions and how they work over here. And the client received great benefit from being able to do these simple things that, in our experience and watching, has increased their ability to generate revenue and win more business. Any thoughts on that, Ron? Okay. Well, the ROI of this type of intelligence is, let's imagine you're a billion-dollar company. If not, go ahead and do the math so you can apply it to yourself. But if you're a $1 billion company, you're probably generating $350 million a year on new revenue. Some of that is going to be maintained accounts and resales and such. But there's a lot of new revenue being brought into your company. If your current win rate is 40, which is a kind of a high number, experience would tell us that 15 to 35 would probably be a good range. But if you were able to take that 40, increase it by 10% to 44%, you'd be generating $14 million new dollars of revenue with the same amount of effort and the same amount of resources. You don't have to hire new salespeople. You don't have to create new marketing initiatives. You're just going to pull more business into your company. That's free money. Well, of course, it's not free, but it's money you didn't have before. It's found revenue. Based on a typical Primary Intelligence impact-based program that we've just described, every dollar spent in that would yield $63 of new revenue, which is, I think, a pretty powerful story. All right, number 3, the ability to do win-back programs. And this is a very exciting part of win-loss and what it can provide to you. As we talk about win-back, we have to acknowledge kind of the process here of, you as a company spend time, money, and put your resources into prospects to have them evaluate you. It goes into a sales opportunity. A decision is made, and that decision can go one of two ways. It can become a win, or it can become a loss. Now, I know that most companies believe they're doing a good job of win back, and in fact there are quite a few that I've seen that I would credit with doing a very good job of being there after the decision's been made to scoop those customers back up. But do you have a disciplined and regimented system for doing that? How are you taking those losses and converting them back into wins? Well, that's the kind of information that you've got to have to be effective and to grow your company. Loyalty and advocacy is an interesting topic. Very big in Voice of the Customer. This idea of having satisfied customers. Well, satisfied customers leave every day. Loyal customers are those that will come back to you. Advocates being those that will advertise you to their friends and their circle of influence. Okay. Well, you've got to know your new clients, those that you've won, are they ready to become your advocates? And on those that didn't choose you, are they loyal? Are they going to become advocates of the competition? Or are they finding out that the grass is not as green as they hoped it was? Are they getting ready to switch? And the idea is that by asking the right loyalty questions, even to those people that you lost, you can help to get some insight into what is our chance of getting this client back in the future. In fact, this chart looks a lot like the one that Ron talked about earlier. And the idea being that, asking these questions: do we provide superior quality products and services? Do we deserve a strong recommendation? And will we get serious consideration for future business? That's all fine and dandy for us. But Ron, talk about what we can learn about the competitors in this same type of information.
Well, you can learn several things. I mean, one of the things you can learn from this is things that will help your salespeople in terms of how strong a recommendations do you think they'll be able to get when they're within the sales process. It'll also give you indications about which competitors are the ones you'll be most likely to, poach business from.
Right.
So if you looked at this, for example, and looked for the "we'll get serious consideration," in this particular case, you have a really good chance against probably both of the competitors mentioned there, although the competitors as a whole, which would include ones that weren't Fuji or IBM, have a advantage over you. But you can see that for IBM and for Fuji, you do have an advantage over that. So those may be the particular competitors that you've lost to that you may want to go back and say, well, let's hit that up a little bit sooner than we might a typical opportunity to see, are they willing to come over to us or to reevaluate.
I mean, you could almost assign them a pseudo account team at that point with the intention of keeping the relationship alive and bringing them over, because you know that those are high risk wins for IBM and Fuji.
And not only on the aggregate like we have here, but on an individual level. You can look at the opportunities and find out which ones are the ones that are ripe for win back. On the chart you had earlier, you had that there were two decisions, win and loss. We could probably split up loss into a loss, but not very close to being a loss.
Right.
You could look at that as being they made this decision, but they're not happy with it. They made this decision, they're very happy with it. Those might be the ones you might want to steer clear from in your win-back programs. But it's amazing how many times when we do an interview at Primary Intelligence that we talk to a respondent and they say, yeah, well, we've decided on them, but the implementation is going really horrible, so we think we may drop them real soon.
Right.
In which case, and the surprising thing is that the client doesn't know this. And in their Salesforce automation tool, it's listed as a loss, which means they're not going to be going back to it for a while. But without that competitive intelligence, they don't know that they could probably go back in a month and have a chance of winning it.
Yeah, that's strong. That's very strong. Well, just to give a little bit of, so what, and what does this mean? I'm going to share with you a quote from one of our clients. This was just given to us a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to share it with you because I think that it has relevance to anybody that's on this call. And the quote, you can read it, of course, but he talks about primary intelligence, the value, the ability to directly engage these decision makers. And I'll just go ahead and let that sink in a little bit. But uncovering the truth and winning back 7 of 30 losses from the previous year. Now in healthcare, it's a very year-to-year contract type of environment. Knowing from the day you lose which are most likely to be your next sales, that's huge. Okay? Maintenance packages, software, large hardware, business transactions, all of these have finite life cycles, and they're not always, as your prospects' clients are not always happy that they didn't choose you. What would your added revenues be at your company if you won back 23% of your lost accounts? That's huge. I mean, that just left me, when I read that quote, that just left me I speechless. What can you say to that other than congratulations? You're doing a great job, and we're glad to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's just kind of reminds me of the old cliche that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. Mm-hmm. Using the win-back program in competitive intelligence keeps you from doing that, because if you don't know what caused you to lose in the first place,
right?
What would happen in these year-to-year decisions is they may go in and do the same sales presentation and just hope that this year that they get chosen. Mm-hmm. But with competitive intelligence, you know where to change things, where to fix things, what to focus on in order to make it so that you're creating a new outcome rather than just hoping for a new outcome.
Very powerful. Okay, so in summary, win-loss programs, benefits you can't ignore, valuable competitive intelligence. Where are we? How are we performing against the competition? Analytics to show where your potential ROI is, where your best chance of opportunity is, and win-back business. I don't know. If you could get a 23% win-back rate, boy, even if it was plus or minus 5%, that's a lot of ROI. That justifies a lot of people right there. That would just be powerful. Okay. Does your CI do this, I guess, is the question you ought to be asking. And if not, take a look at implementing win-loss into your own company. It's a very strong and powerful CI tool. It shows very actionable information and tends to be very well received by executives, sales, marketing, and product, because it gives very clear insight into all four of those areas. Now, as we wrap up, I'd like to remind people that we have the ability to do some question and answer right now. And there are a couple of questions that have popped up, and we'll take those here in just a second. Would like to thank those that are with us and invite you to take the win-loss plunge. For those people that are not currently doing win-loss with us and have never had a chance to sample, we're offering the potential to do a couple of free opportunities with us. If you'd like to take advantage of that offer, send me an email, and I'll make sure that you're contacted about that. We'll go through the process, tell you what it works, and this is a chance for you to get a very good taste from a third-party vendor that's been doing it a long time.
And I'll make sure Chris doesn't throw you off a cliff.
Oh, that's very good. I like that. Take a plunge. That looks very refreshing, especially kind of here fall in Utah. This is anyway. Okay, so a reminder that question and answer is available. We'll be taking those questions in just a second. Before we go, let's take a look at a couple of the questions here. The question has been asked, and I think this is applying back to the idea of the analytics and understanding where the opportunity areas are. It says, are there areas of the sales team, if we're using the analytics, could we tell the sales team to stop spending money on those areas that have no impact and clear advantage? In other words, could we tell them where to take the money from and where to put that money so that they're able to prioritize better? And the answer is kind of yes and no on that. And that is that if you're working with primary intelligence, our predictive analytics don't tell you what would happen if your scores were to go backwards. In other words, we're assuming that you're going to maintain your performance in all of those areas. But we are going to tell you that if you spend more time, resource, effort, whatever the case may be, in those areas of high impact, those are what we would expect to bring you the biggest results.
Yeah, we probably wouldn't. It's very dangerous to say, stop spending money on this, because that's what's gotten you where you are. It's more of a case of maintain in all areas, but here are the areas where if you want to improve, whether it's spending money, spending resources, or just focusing your attention in that direction, those are the areas where your impact will show where you'll get gains in your win-loss.
Another question. You've mentioned going back to the potential clients multiple times to ask questions about why you lost business. But I, as a potential client, would be annoyed by repeat questioning. How do you deal with the annoyance factor, and does it preclude getting a good response rate? And I guess something that we didn't make very clear here, and I think that's a fantastic question, is we would expect to get all of these answers in one interview.
Well,
or maybe two if you use the follow-up process.
Yeah, if there's a follow-up, if there's a follow-up, and realize that the follow-up is not going to be nearly as involved as the first interview.
Right.
It's not a case where you go back over and over and over again. Typically, it'll be 2 contacts at most, and that usually doesn't annoy most people, especially since as you're doing the interviews, you want to take note of the ones that seem to be receptive to talking to you and the ones that were less than receptive. If they say in the middle of the interview, "That's it, I'm out of time. Let's stop here," that's probably one you're going to mark as, "I'm not going to go back and follow up with this one."
Sure. Okay. I think that's a great question, though, and yeah, you want to be very careful not to annoy anybody, either they be lost prospects or new clients. It might be possible to put these questions into, in some cases, voice of the customer questions, so you're not doubling. You can double up the use of some of these already current programs you have in order to not be bothering them too many times.
Another approach, Chris had mentioned going back to the same clients that rated someone high. If you have a large enough sample size and have enough opportunities that you can go to, you can say, well, this was the area where the areas where there was the most impact, say presentations. Typically, you would go back to the people you talked to previously and ask them about the presentations.
Right.
But you don't necessarily have to. You could go to an entirely different group of people with another interview and just ask questions about of the people that you talked to or the vendors you dealt with, which one had the best presentation and why did they have the best presentation? That's an entirely new respondent set that so you wouldn't have any of that survey fatigue.
Great idea. Question that pops up, and I know we've hit our hour, and I appreciate everybody's patience. If you have any more questions, please go ahead and let us know. By the way, we will have available tomorrow an email that will go out, a follow-up that will tell you where you can download the presentation and an actual recording of the webinar. So that will be sent to everyone if anybody wants to have that information. The question is, how does your firm respond when you have competing clients asking for your service? In other words, if we have a couple of different clients in the same industry, a couple of healthcare providers or maybe a GoToMeeting and a WebEx or something like that, how do we do win-loss for 2 separate clients and keep that clean? Good question. The answer is that everything we do at Primary Intelligence is kept very compartmentalized. We would assign different project managers, have different databases. We don't cross-pollinate the information. And in fact, we've gone so far when we've had that issue pop up that if 2 of our clients submit the same opportunity, the first one to submit the opportunity gets the information, or we will attempt to interview that person twice if they're willing to do that, once for client A and once for client B. We do not allow any of our information from one client or initiative to go into the results for any other.
Or attempt to contact a different decision maker in that opportunity.
Sure.
Because in most opportunities, you're going to have at least a couple of people that were involved in the decision.
Again, we've gone over our hour. We appreciate your willingness to be with us today. If we've missed any of your questions, we're happy to respond in person. You have our information. We look very forward to having the opportunity to be with you. Hope you found this valuable, and we appreciate the fact that you'd spend an hour with us today.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.